Hi, welcome back. This time we are going to be working on finishing up our head and attaching it to the body. Let's get started right away. Okay, so we have a few pieces that I want to talk about first. The first part is the beard. Okay, so the beard looks like this, very simple. Let me show it to you on our oni. It is this piece that's going to come along the side of the face, under and around the other side. Additionally, we're going to attach the ear to our beard. Now, I've worked in advance to save us a little bit of time, and I can show you how that looks. From the back, you can see that the beard is just sewn around the sides and the bottom. From the front, you can see that is attached all the way around. If we turn it inside, right side out, I guess, you can see how the beard has been attached. And notice I have pinned an ear. Now, where do we pin the ear? There's a couple of markers to help you out. Look at your own face. I do this to help remind myself. Touch the top of the ear where it connects and pull it across. You can see it comes right to the top of your eyes. The bottom of the ear, if you pull it across, it comes down right about above the mouth, in the lower nose region. So you're looking at this space right here. When you're looking at your oni, you're looking at the same connection points, the top of the eyes down to the nose, okay? But it's marked for you on the pattern as well. There is a light gray box that is placed right along the placement line for you. I like to tell you about how to check in regards to visually by looking at the face, so that you can just double check where you're pinning that ear. Now notice I have pinned the ear facing inward, okay, not outward, but inward, okay? Let's talk about the ear. This is our earpiece, and we're gonna sew around the outside, not here, just around the outside, which I've already done. Let's just turn our ear inside out, or right side out, I guess is what we would want to say, and kind of just poke it through. I like to use some kind of blunt object to kind of push the tips of my ears through so I can get a nice easy. In this case, I'm just using my blunt scissors. And you can see our ear looks like this. Now, you can leave it with the bottom open like this, fold it in half. See how I did that? Fold it over and then pin. But what I like to do is I like to baste. I'll sew right down here at the bottom for it to be closed, just so that all of those pieces will stay together. And then I'll fold and I'll pin. So you can kind of see our ear. It's pretty cute, right? You'll see I'll unpin this and I'll show you what I mean. See how I used a stitch that's a width of 4, so not tight sewing, but just something to kind of tack it, and then I'm going to fold it over. And that's going to make my ear, and then I'm going to pin it, because you're going to sew it on this side. You don't want to sew the entire ear, you're just going to sew it along this side. But you want to pin to make sure that you get, see how thin this piece is right here? So you want to make sure that you pin it so that when you sew, you're going to be able to sew it all the way through and get all sides. Okay, so that is the front part of our face. Now the next thing we need to do is we're going to work on the back. We'll start with the lower half. For Brendan's oni, which looks like this one, we have hair that has, I don't know what that length is, maybe 3/4 of an inch in length. Or we could have just gone with the same material as the beard, and so it would look kind of like it was shaven across the back, okay? So you decide, because you're the designer when you are sewing. We are going to sew this back piece and the under the head piece together. Now I've done that already, but let me show you the pattern pieces. For the hair, you're just going to sew along this line. Okay, that's all you're doing, this line. And then for the underhead, this is really important. You're going to sew from here to the dot, which is very, very, very small. We want this open down at the bottom because when we attach the head and the neck, we need space to pull the head open to go across that seam. Otherwise, you're going to be in a tight space sewing, and that makes it very difficult. Now, after you've done that, where you've got both sides, it's very simple. You're going to sew these two together. Okay, right sides together, and we're going to sew, and then it'll open up. Okay, so you can see I've already done that. So here's our hair, and then this is the underside. You can see where it's been sewn in the middle. And then here, I only sewed a small amount. It's still open down at this side right here. Okay? And then we sewed them together. See, this is all straight stitch sewing. Super, 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 super easy. So our next step will be adding these two together. So once we've got our ears pinned in place, right sides together, we'll start at the top of the beard and the top part of the hair, and we're going to pin it all the way around, matching to where the neck opens, okay? So you're going to do one side, and then you're going to do the other. So real quickly here, I'll just pin. Now here's an important thing when you're sewing with the hair. You want to push the hair away from the seam that you are sewing. So when I pin this together, don't forget your ear, okay? When I pin this together, I'm pushing the hair downward and away from the seam. Okay, downward and away from the seam. Not only does this make it easier to sew, but it makes it so that your hair comes out nicer. Okay, can you see that? All right, so what I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to put our ears in place, and I'm going to sew around that section so that you can see what it looks like. After we do that, then we're going to work on the top of the head. So I'll be right back with you, okay? All right, see you in a moment. But I also need to show you the pre-stitching. Before you sew the horn in, you want to do your stitching that gives the horn kind of its look. And you can see what I do is I stitch right on top of the pattern. That way I know I get my lines, and then I just rip the pattern away. Do you see how that just came right off? So I'll try and do that again. If I just pull the pattern away, it comes right off. And so I'll do that for each side, the middle. And here's the other thing. If you do it this way, you don't have to use any kind of fabric, stay fabric beneath. See? Works out really good. So now we have our horn is all ready. Let me move all these pieces away. And our option is to sew it first. So right sides together. And then all we do is sew across the top with yellow, of course. And then we would have our horn. Okay, we're back. So I did some sewing in advance, and just to remind you, this is the top of the head. This is the pattern for the top of the head. And what we had to do was to sew our darts right here, and then sew along the top and back of the head, and then right here, I guess this would be kind of right across the forehead, and then that creates a hole for us to put our horn into. So I'll remove this and show you how it turned out. Ta-da! So you can see, remember with the horn, the important thing is that the seam on the back of the horn has to go with the seam that's moving across the back. So the seam of the horn does not go in the front. And so you can see now we have the top of the head and the horn that is applied, and we can now join it with our face. Okay, so we're going to turn this so it is right sides are in, and I'm going to turn this so that the right sides are out so I can put right sides together. And I will then insert into our existing head, and I'm going to line up, my points to line up is the back seam of the head and the back seam of the top of the head. And then we are going to pin this together. Remember, we want to push all the hair downward and away from our sewing area. Okay, so I always pin my seams first, make sure that those are matching really good. So maybe you put one pin on one side of the seam and one pin on the other side of the seam, just so that it's nice. And you can see, you know, the hair's kind of crazy and out of control, but if you just stuff it inside and then you just want to push the hair downward. Okay, just keep pushing it downward. And then we're going to pin as we push the hair downward all the way around, and then we're going to sew it. So I'm going to go do that, and I'll be back with you as soon as it's completed. Okay, we're ready for the next step. Now let me talk about a few pointers. As you can see, we have sewn the top part of our head to the bottom part of our head. But it's sometimes not as easy as it looks, only in that we have a very small sewing seam allowance, which is 1/4 of an inch. And this material is really thick. It's bulky when you get all that hair in there. So what I do after I sew it is I go back around and I check all of my seams all the way around to see if there are areas where the material didn't mesh up correctly and where it's likely to pull apart with play. And I'll go back and I'll reinforce those. So if you look really close, you can see that there are areas where I have gone back as many as times as it takes me to make sure that I have a really good seam that is not going to pull apart. Okay, and then notice here with my horn, I sewed that by hand. Okay, and the way that I do that is I just do a simple straight stitch around twice, and then I do a whip stitch for my final stitch. And you know, maybe you don't need to do it, you know, 3 full times around, but I do just because, again, it's easier to do it now than to have to fix it after it breaks. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this inside out, and the neck area is small, so you gotta kind of play with it a little bit, you know, taking a little bit at a time, but he will come out. Here we go. Oh, he's almost there. Ta-da! And you can see we have the Oni head. So there's our horn. Now, when we were pinning him, one of the other things I was looking for is making sure that the horn was going to line up in the middle of the face. So while you're pinning, you're always double checking, you know, all these little elements. Now, the only thing we have to do is stitch our head and our body together. Okay, so you can see that we've got our neck opening here and our head opening down at the bottom. Okay, and so we will put right sides together. So start on one end and we're going to pin at the back opening, center back opening. Start pinning there, and then we're going to match the side of the beard to the shoulder seam. I'll show that to you. So you can see where the beard meets, and here's my shoulder seam. So I like to do one side and then the other. So I'm going to match my other center back opening and pin it. And that's just my preference. You can do it, any way that you want to do it. But I do it that way just to try to make sure that by the time I get all the way around, that I don't have it lopsided. So I'm going to match again the beard line with the shoulder seam, and then open it up and pin around the front, and then I will sew that. So I'm going to finish pinning and sewing, and I'm going to come back and show you how the whole thing looks once it's put together. Okay? I'll be back with you in just a moment. Okay, so we've done an awful lot today. Here is our Oni once his head is attached. Now remember, just like I said before, when you have seams that are difficult to sew, whether it's just because of thickness, or in this case, this was a little bit of a small space, and you know how I feel about small space sewing. It's not my favorite. And so it can get tough. So you have to go back and double check your seams, make sure that they are reinforced well enough that they're going to endure for play. So look at the messy sewing I have on my small space. Can you see that? Look at the other side. So I had an area where I went down into the seam, and that wouldn't have been good. It would have pulled open. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to keep sewing over until I get a nice good stitch all the way around that's going to endure play. It doesn't matter how messy it is on the inside, so just make sure that you do that. Now the next step that we have is to stuff our Oni. What we want to do is make sure that we fill the feet with some type of beans. Now it doesn't have to be this particular brand, but you can see the pellets that I'm talking about. And what I do is I fill the whole foot. So the beans are all the way up to where you sew, the ankle. And the reason I do that is we need to have weight down at the feet so that the Oni will be able to stand up, because his head is going to have so much stuffing. Okay, so the other trick that I do for stuffing is I use tools to help me push the stuffing down into these narrow spots, like down the legs and in the arms and up here in the horn. So I just take chopsticks and duct tape, and I wrap the duct tape around the chopsticks so they don't separate, and I put the stuffing in and I push through with the chopsticks until I get it packed. Now you have to determine how much stuffing that you want. Okay, so if you want it stuffed so that it's soft and kind of squishy, you won't use a lot. But if you want it packed firmly, so this Oni has it packed very firmly through his entire body, okay? In order to do that, you have to compress this. Can you see how it like compresses down? And that's what this is for. So as you put it in, you're pushing it through and you're compressing, okay, until you get a firm feel, okay? And so that takes a little bit of effort to get all the way through the body. Now, once you have stuffed it to the degree that you would like it stuffed, then to close, you are simply going to use a whip stitch all along the back side. And you'll find that as you pull that whip stitch, even though it's a larger stitch, you won't see it. So if you look here, I actually used a dark thread, but you can hardly see it. So I used a large kind of an upholstery thread and whip stitch that in, but you don't have to use upholstery thread. Just make sure that you have, a double thickness so that your thread has been looped through and you have at least 2 strands of thread that are in your needle. Well, I'm going to go and stuff the Omi, and the next time we come back together, we're going to make accessories. So we have to make his club, as you can see here, and we're going to make his little, I don't know if I want to call this a skirt because he's a boy, but we're going to make his covering here, and then also his armbands to finish our Oni on the next episode. So I hope you're following along and you're super excited because your Oni is starting to look like something at this point, and I will see you next time. Until then, bye.